discussion with moderator and question ideas founder Gabe Lyons Wednesday, Keller warned that secular culture in America is now at a point where the only sin is to tell people that they sin, and traditional Protestant catechism needs to be better prepared Christian children to thrive in a world where they are constantly being bombarded with the new secular gospel on social media. Roughly speaking, every other culture always taught the truth is something outside me. It could be family, God, dying for my country, and to be a person of honor and worth, authenticity. You had to find the truth and align your feelings with the truth. Now the understanding is truth is inside you. You go inside to find the great depths, and then you come out and you tell everybody else that you have to now accommodate me, said Keller. Modern secular culture, said Keller, is now at the point where people believe that they need to be saved from the idea that they need salvation from God. And for that to happen and to realize their brand of salvation, Christians must be evangelized. Post-Christian culture is based on liberation from Christianity. If you go to China or Africa and you're talking to animists or Confucianists or people like that, they may think you're wrong. They may even want to kill you because they feel like you're imperialistic. But modern secular people are actually saying the thing we need to be saved from is the idea we need to be saved. The thing we need redemption from is the idea we need redemption, Keller told Lyons. Research by the Public Religion Research Institute in 2016 on why Americans are leaving religion also pointed to the increasing share of the American adults who have been joining the ranks of the religiously unaffiliated and said it's being fed by an exodus of those who grew up with religious identity. Young Americans today are also more likely than seniors to be raised without a religious identity. When Sights and Sound Theater's creators Dan Deal and Kristen Brewer decided to tackle the biblical account of Queen Esther for their next live stage production, they had no idea just how timely the story would be. Mere days before the spectacular stage production was set to premiere back in March, Sight and Sound was forced to close its doors due to the lockdown orders in response to the novel coronavirus. Over 400 performances of Queen Esther scheduled for the following 9 months were cancelled, and over 500,000 in tickets were refunded. Despite setbacks, Sight and Sound decided the show must go on digitally. On Friday, Queen Esther will come to life, making its worldwide debut on the new streaming platform Sight and Sound TV. The importance of women highlighted in the story of Esther is also a focal point of the theatrical production. Brewer noted that though women aren't always named among the heroes of faith, like David and Abraham, God often uses women for his purposes in both the Old and New Testaments. That message is for everyone. God has a plan and a purpose for their life. They can walk away knowing that. It's a call to action. Even if that action is, be still. That's very active. Be still. Trust him. Trust him with your life. The live performance will now be available to be seen on Sight and Sound's new streaming platform, sight-sound.tv, on September 4th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, along with other stage productions by Sight and Sound Theaters on Labor Day weekend. The pastor of a large California church that was fined over $50,000 for holding indoor worship services despite adhering to social distancing guidelines said that even as the county continues to increase penalties, the church will remain open. Jack Traber pastor of North Valley Baptist Church in Santa Clara, California, said on Tuesday that Santa Clara County posted an additional order on the church's order this week and is fining the congregation $5,000 for each service. The charges include $5,000 per in-person service, Sunday morning and evening, as well as Wednesday night, and additional violations for not social distancing, although it is practiced in the auditorium that seats 3,000 people and singing. They've ratcheted this thing up, Traber said, adding that in total, the congregation has been fined $52,750. America, this is a serious moment, Traber said. Government, it must stop. It cannot continue this way. Traber read from the Bill of Rights, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, he said. He called the county's actions harassment and warning, if we don't stop it here, it's going to sweep all over the United States of America. Government cannot take away our freedom. You cannot take our right to assemble. The pastor asked the county to remove all fines and refrain from imposing future fines on the church. To do this to a church, California preachers, we have rendered unto Caesar the things that are Caesar, and we have rendered unto God through our tithes and offering, which is his, he said. Polls show the presidential race tightening, including in key battleground states. So that's where President Trump and his Democratic challenger, Vice President Biden, have traveled this week. Wisconsin, hit with protests and violence in recent days, got a visit from both candidates. And Trump also headed into Biden's territory in Pennsylvania, one of the most crucial swing states. In Kenosha, Wisconsin, the former vice president talked to residents there after visiting the family of Jacob Blake, the African-American whose shooting by police kicked off days of violent rioting. Biden discussed racism in America. Speaking of Kenosha's recent troubles, he said, it also exposed what had not been paid enough attention to. The underlying racism that is institutionalized in the United States still exists, has existed for 400 years. In Biden's own home state of Pennsylvania, Trump went after his opponent for softness on the violence during racial prejudice protests in recent months and silence on law and order. Trump told the crowd in Latrobe for the entire summer Biden was silent as far-left rioters viciously attacked law enforcement in Democrat-run cities, burned down businesses, terrorized civilians, and recently marched through the streets chanting, "Death to America." This is what we have. Biden's been trying to beat back his own bad publicity concerning the virus and the economy after he assured Americans in an ABC News interview he'd shut the whole country down again if scientists recommend that to fight the virus. He suggested a reverse on that stand, saying in Wilmington, Delaware this week, there's going to be no need, in my view, to be able to shut down the whole country anymore. While those issues predominate now, Trump is again highlighting how Democrats' push for tens of millions of mail-in votes could be the biggest problem come Election Day. Both campaigns are already lining up lawyers for a legal battle over problems with those votes. A man suspected of fatally shooting a supporter of a right-wing group in Portland, Oregon, last week after a caravan of Donald Trump backers rode through downtown was killed Thursday as investigators move in and to arrest him, the U.S. Marshal Services said on Friday. The man, Michael Forrest Reynolds, 48, was killed as a federal task force attempted to apprehend him in Lacey, Washington, about 120 miles north of Portland. Reynal was the prime suspect in the killing of 39-year-old Aaron J. Danielson, who was shot in the chest Saturday night, a senior Justice Department official told the Associated Press. Federal agents from the FBI and the U.S. Marshal Service had located Reynal on Thursday after a warrant was issued for his arrest. During the encounter, Reynal was shot by a law enforcement officer who was working on the federal task force, the official said. The official could not discuss the matter publicly and spoke to the AP on condition of anonymity. The U.S. Marshal Service and the official said Reynal had pulled a gun during the encounter. The U.S. Marshal Service Fugitives Task Force, comprised of deputy marshals, other federal agents, and local law enforcement officers from a variety of agencies, are responsible for apprehending violent felons and other wanted suspects. Brady said investigations haven't yet determined how many rounds were fired. Lebanon's military said it found more than 4 tons of ammonium nitrate near the Beirut port on Thursday, the same substance involved in the catastrophic explosion that killed 191 people and injured 6,000 last month. The military said in a statement that they discovered 4.35 tons of ammonium nitrate in containers at a facility near the port. The Army said experts were called in and they are dealing with the material. There were no details on where the substance came from or who owns it. Meanwhile, French experts as well as FBI are investigating the cause of the August 4th blast that left nearly 300,000 Lebanese homeless. The explosion was caused when 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate were detonated, ripping through the Beirut port. In the days after the explosion, Italian and French experts working in the port said they found more than 20 containers carrying dangerous materials in the port. The Lebanese military later said the containers were moved to safer locations away from the port. So far, more than 25 people, mostly Lebanese customs officials, have been arrested following the explosion. Bahrain announced late Thursday that it will now allow all flights coming to and departing from the United Arab Emirates to traverse its airspace. The island kingdom's statement came just after Saudi Arabia made a similar announcement. Neither statements directly name the Jewish state, but imply that Israel commercial airliners can now fly where they were never allowed to before to reach the UAE. Earlier this week, White House advisor Jared Kushner flew with a U.S. and Israeli delegation to the United Arab Emirates in the first ever commercial flight between the two countries. Saudi Arabia allowed the plane to enter its airspace, signaling that attitudes towards Israel are shifting in the Middle East. The delegations held high-level meetings in Abu Dhabi to finalize the new U.S.-brokered peace agreement between the UAE and Israel. The two countries agreed to collaborate in technology, economy, foreign policy, and other areas. The United Arab Emirates agreed to normalize ties with Israel in exchange for Israel halting its contentious plans to annex parts of the West Bank, Biblical Judea and Samaria, which the Palestinians seek for their future states. The deal may also allow the UAE to purchase advanced weaponry from the US, including the F-35 stealth fighter jet. The Palestinians and Iran have fiercely rejected the UAE peace agreements and urge other Muslim countries not to normalize ties with Israel. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas met with the leaders of the Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror groups in Ramallah Thursday night to discuss how to move forward in the wake of the Israeli-UAE peace deals. Abbas's meeting focused on reconciling the differences between the Palestinian factions, the Palestinian Authority, which controls the West Bank, and Hamas, which controls the Gaza Strips, have a long history of the rivalry. In the face of unrest and violent protests all across the country, a wave of revival is growing. Recently in Portland, Oregon, thousands of Christians lifted their voices in prayer, praise and worship for an event called Riots to Revival. It was an effort to heal the brokenness resulting from the pandemic. Just hours before, protesters had set fire to the city's police headquarters. Sean Foe has been a leader of the worship movement. It's fun watching God show up, Foe told CBN News. We've spent the last 15 years, going into a lot of dark, hard nations around the world, North Korea, Iraq, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, and now we get to do it in our own nation. In Seattle, Washington, the area formerly known as CHOP or Chaz had become a focal point for protesters who took over the neighborhood earlier this summer. Demonstrators basically took over this part of the city following the death of George Floyd. A group recently tried to shut down a prayer rally there, but Fout said the power of God took over. The Lord started to move, even on some of the Satanists that came. God started to move, said Fout. We were able to pray and minister to a lot of them. In California, where indoor worship services have been banned because of COVID-19 restrictions, churches have been discovering new ways to serve their communities. Pastor Mickey Stonia of San Diego's Rock Church shared on CBN's Prayer Link program how God is using the pandemic to the church's advantage. We've had 135 churches in San Diego come together, said Stonia. We had a prayer event, 11 different locations. We had over 15,000 people around San Diego or online. We called it We Pray San Diego. People prayed for an hour for the Lord's work, for revival to take place in San Diego. In July, on the sandy shores of Huntington Beach, hundreds came together to worship, pray, and receive salvation as part of an event called Saturate OC. Many of them gave their lives to Christ and were baptized. Jesse Green, one of the event's organizers, told CBN News, people are just being set free, and there's so much joy and so much peace. And people are being set free from depression and suicidal thoughts. And it just feels like what God would want, like what God would always want the earth to look like. A similar outcome recently played out in Chicago, where deadly violence has been rampant. A ministry called The Last Reformation flooded the city through tent revivals and street evangelism. As Headline praised the peace agreements between Israel and the UAE, some question whether the Gulf state can keep the peace. That's because it financially supports an educational curriculum of hate against Israel taught in Palestinian-controlled areas. Right now, the UAE is one of the top donors of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. UNRWA has a school curriculum provided by the Palestinian Authority inciting Palestinian children to wage war on the Jews. David Bendil, director of the Center for Near East Policy Research, has spent years investigating what is being taught to Palestinian children in UNRWA schools. The curriculum, which we have painstakingly gone through all 364 school books, which mandates that children have to be trained for belligerence against Israel, to take up arms against Israel. Their slogan is the right of return by force of arms, Bedain told CBN News. He argues the only way to stop this incident is to confront donor countries from the UAE. Gaza children went back to school in mid-August and also began helping to launch fire and explosive balloons at Israel. In one of Badain's documentaries, which he says are filmed by Palestinian cameramen, they've interviewed children. Molotov cocktails are very helpful to us. They cause great damage to the Jews, said Mohammed Abed Al-Hadi, a student at a UNRWA school. The balloons are good for us, said Amero Mohammed, another UNRWA student. The conqueror's economy is damaged because of the fire balloons. The school year has begun on the wrong foot with Hamas, which controls UNRWA firing at all of Israel. Well, that can be restrained, said Badain. Badain believes that begins with pressure on the UAE to take full advantage of the peace opportunities. The US and Israel are approaching this major donor nation to UNRWA, the UAE. Now is the time to say, now this is a time of good feelings. This is the time of business. This is the time of euphoria. Let's use the euphoria in a direct way. Currently, the school curriculum is written by the Palestinian Authority. Badain wants to see a different approach to education written and taught by Palestinians who want peace and supervised by professionals who believe in the stated values of the United Nations instead of the values of the PLO. Over 120 Black American leaders in both parties have signed a document addressed to Planned Parenthood, urging it to confront systematic racism inherent in the abortion industry and the legacy of its founder, Margaret Sanger. Today, we are saying emphatically and unequivocally that Planned Parenthood must confront its racist founding mission and practices. Too many Black lives have been lost to abortion. All Black lives matter, the letter reads. Among those who signed the letter are Louisiana State Senator Katrina Jackson, Georgia State Representative Mac Jackson, and Michigan's Kent County Commissioner Monica Sparks, all of whom are Democrats. Black Republican signers include Indiana Attorney General Curtis Hill and Texas State Representative James White. Conservative think tank Heritage Foundation President Kay Coles James, former NFL star Benjamin Watson, and pro-life activist Alveda King, who is the niece of Martin Luther King Jr., also signed the letter. Pro-life advocates have long pointed out that the vast majority of Planned Parenthood clinics are located in predominantly racial minority neighborhoods. The letter, which is addressed to Planned Parenthood's acting president, Alexis McGill Johnson, reads, "The impact of abortion on Black communities is unequal and disproportionate. Despite constituting only 13% of female population, Black women represent 36% of all abortions, and Black women are 5 times more likely than white women to receive an abortion. In some cities like New York, more Black children are aborted every year than are born alive. This is no accident. Across the country, Planned Parenthood's surgical facilities target minority communities for abortion. In fact, 79% of Planned Parenthood's surgical abortion facilities are located in or near communities of color. Can Planned Parenthood really claim to care for Black lives while remaining complicit in the targeting of Black pregnant women? Amid ongoing social unrest, with protests and resurgent national conversation about racial issues within the criminal justice system and police departments, Planned Parenthood of Greater New York recently disavowed Sanger's eugenics views. Thus far, the national headquarters of the abortion provider in Washington, D.C. has said nothing, the African American leaders noted. This massive iniquity and the disproportionate harm it does to Black Americans is fully in keeping with the racist, eugenistic vision of your organization's founder. Margaret Sanger wanted to use abortion and contraception to cull minority populations, the letter states. In a statement sent to the Christian Post Tuesday, Reverend Dale Nelson, executive director of the pro-life group Human Coalition Action, said this effort demonstrates the outrage among the Black community that we have been strategically and consistently targeted by the abortion industry ever since the practice was legalized almost 50 years ago. Their words come as employees of the abortion giant have recently spoken openly about the practices within the organization, alleging mistreatment on the basis of race and a hostile workplace environment. A petition calling for the dismantling of Pornhub, the largest pornography hosting website in the world that critics says profits off and enables sex trafficking as well as child abuse, has surpassed 2 million signatures. The petition, launched in February by Layla McElwaite, director of abolition for the Sacramento-based nonprofit Exodus Cry, has received signatures from 192 countries, according to a statement sent to the Christian Post on Tuesday. The petition and corresponding website allege, with notable evidence, that the site has been enabling and profiting off of crimes like rape, abduction, sexual assault, and sex trafficking. The petition even yielded a letter from the U.S. Senate Ben Sasse, Republican for Nebraska, in March, asking the Attorney General Bill Barr to conduct a federal investigation into the porn website and its parent company, MindGeek. A group of lawmakers in Canada did likewise, asking the same of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Recently, Mickelwaite met with lawmakers in Washington, D.C. and presented an evidence-based case against the website, which she says draws about 42 billion views per year. All it takes to upload content to Pornhub is an email address. No government-issued ID is required. Pornhub doesn't bother to reliably verify the age or the content of the millions featured in the videos it hosts and profits from, Mickelwaite said in a statement this week. The site is set up for exploitation. Here is the news recap for today. In culture-pushing gospel, without God, Sunday school isn't enough for Christian kids, Tim Keller says. Lebanese military finds 4.35 tons of explosives near ground zero of Beirut disaster. California church refuses to close after being fined over $50,000 for singing "Meeting Inside." It must stop. Today's news was reported by CBN and the Christian Post. My name is Russell Sarup, and this is Kingdom News. Until next time, do have a blessed evening.